how can we use your expertise, for example, in mobilizing grassroots efforts to try and educate, to try and make sure that this new generation is looking at things through the proper lens?
Well, I think we have a vacuum right now. And what I mean by that is I think the left has gone so bonkers that it has created this opportunity where, of course, young people are coming and looking for something else. What else would they do? What is the alternative for a young person when you're in these public institutions, these government schools, and you are told that you have privilege? You are told that you can become a woman if you're a man. You're told that if you're a girl competing in sports, you can have a guy with a dick playing in your game. Of course, this is a natural pushback because I look at it as insanity versus rational thought.
America is divided because our powerful federal government pits red states against blue. We need to return power to the states and to the people by decentralizing. If that fails, we must be prepared for a peaceful national divorce or face a destructive civil war. Welcome to War, Divorce, or Federalism. America at a crossroad.
Cliff Maloney has been a driving force behind mobilizing grassroots activists nationwide, from his leadership at Young Americans for Liberty to his recent work with Citizens Alliance and the Pennsylvania Chase, where Cliff was instrumental in the outcome of the presidential election in Pennsylvania in 2024. Cliff, I think that you are a perfect guest for our program, where we delve into the idea of the importance of decentralization or federalization, where we empower the states, take away power from the federal government, and in doing so, make it so that we have a more civilized society in the United States, where we're not trying to control each other, and we don't have red states versus blue states and so forth. So welcome to the program, Cliff.
Rick, always good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So you've spent a lot of time. You are, I would say, an expert, probably the expert in mobilizing grassroots individuals who are passionate about politics, passionate about the direction of the country. How do you see someone like yourself, the organizations that you've been working with, how do you see their role in something like what this program is built on, which is the importance of federalization, decentralization?
Yeah, well, look, I got involved in politics because of Ron Paul back in 2010 is when I originally found him. Ended up interning for Ron in 2011, worked for him in 2012, and was really fascinated by this idea that people were obsessed with federal politics. And it makes sense, right? You turn on the news, if you're consuming any type of media, people follow the White House, they follow the Senate, the House, they follow the Supreme Court. And that seems to be a lot of the things that we care about, or at least we're told to care about by media. And so I've just always, kind of tried to look at things with an analytical mind. And I've always said, well, a lot of the real battles happen at the state and local level. And 2016 was kind of an eye opener for me. I worked for Rand Paul on his presidential race. And then after that, I had helped out with his Senate reelect once he dropped out of the presidential. And Rick, there was one major thing that I found, and that was the left understood having a paid ground game with community organizers and then volunteers. And the right, while we had a lot of them, we only had volunteers. And I couldn't really figure out why, we weren't diving in on that. So that was kind of my first eye opener. The second was, okay, if this door knocking works and if these paid community organizers or folks that are going door to door, if this is working, where would it work best? And so what I did was I pretty much got together with my right-hand man, Justin Grice, and we started to analyze this and say, hey, if we care about decentralization, if we care about liberty, if we care about winning, where can we have the most impact, or what races are the most important? And we found very quickly that state house and state senate races across the country are by far the best investment and just thing that you can spend your time doing if you're looking to make an impact. And the reason is because door to door not only works, but you can have so much of an impact on these smaller universes. And it was funny, Rick, because in 2018, when I first launched a program that said, hey, we're going to go door to door and we're going to specifically target state house and state senate races, it was tough to get attention. It was tough to get interest. But 2020 kind of changed all that. And there were two major things that did that. One was COVID. And people realized, hold on a second, if you really believe in decentralization, if you really believe in checks and balances, the very, very good governors and the actual people that had strong backbones in the state house and state senates, they were the only thing pushing back against the craziness of Joe Biden. That was it. And so people were all of a sudden like, man, I really want to have a solid state that is really pro-constitution and limited government to be a defender against the feds. Okay, that was the first moment. The second one was certifying the election, right? So circle back to the election, and people said, hold on a second. There's this whole battle in Congress, but who certifies the elections? The state legislatures certify it? So my journey of kind of not just understanding that doors make sense, but that where we should be spending our time as activists is at the state level. It's really only built up since that happened in 2018, leading to 2020. But I think a lot of Americans now, a lot of patriots and activists at the grassroots level, they now understand the states are the battle, and the more energy we put there, the more impact we're going to have.
I think that's fantastic insight. This insight that you have and have been gaining since COVID time, do you think that other national organizations are seeing the importance that really the state level is where things are at? For example, where are you seeing this?
Yeah. So number one, I don't see that. I think the reason I don't see that from national organizations is, once again, where is the attention of the donor class? The attention of the donor class is on national issues. Okay. And so I think, the reason I'd be able to have success is at Citizens Alliance, we focus on 4 states. We're in Pennsylvania, we're in North Dakota, we're in Idaho, and we're in New Hampshire. And we're in each of those states for different reasons. We got 2 red states, 2 purple states. Okay. And the objectives are the same. We want to create one state where we have we call it a liberty state, with the idea being that if we can go into a state and if we can drastically change the role of government, if we can doge the state, if you will, I'll give Elon some credit for branding. I think what you do is you set an example. You go into a state, you abolish the income tax, abolish the property tax, you put universal school choice in, you cut government spending by 15, 20, 25%, eliminate a lot of these agencies, these random fees, these random taxes. What'll happen? My theory is businesses will flock there. People will flock there. Quality of life goes through the roof. And then the most important part is all the other so-called red states that claim to be conservative, claim to be free market, they claim to want to shrink the size and scope and role of government. They're going to get questions saying, why aren't we like that liberty state? And I've learned that you have to have an example. In politics, you have to start with a proof of concept. Okay, I didn't really start to take off until we won our first state house race. Right? Once you win a race, you say, hey, listen, here was our plan. We funded the plan. We executed the plan. Here are the results. What's the honest assessment? And so I'd love to say that you have this national trend of organizations focusing at the state level. I don't necessarily see that, but I do see a lot of donors starting to notice that some of these battles at the state level are where it's going to happen. And I think Doge is a huge opportunity. I just had an op-ed in Breitbart that we should Doge every state. And I truly believe that. Now, is California, and if you look at New York, are they front runners for that? No. But it is something I'm calling on every state leader and anyone who wants to make an impact. Look at your state policy. There is now a national framework to expose the waste, fraud, and abuse. Start doing that at your state level. Hold the Republicans especially accountable who say they want to cut taxes, say they want to limit government, say they want free markets. Hold them accountable. Why are we not cutting our state budget by 10%? We're talking about increasing it by 15 and reducing that to 12. It's still an increase. How do we go from $100 on our budget to getting down to $90? That's the conversation I think we need in the states across this country.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. When you were speaking there, something occurred to me. You're exactly right. Where the push is going to be driven by where the money is, of course. I mean, that's the nature of things. And so it's sort of like the donor class, as you call them, they need to see the light, if you will. They need to be educated that really the state races, the state concerns is where the power play should be. So perhaps Citizens Alliance is really the tip of the spear in bringing this to the forefront. I mean, hopefully other groups will see that.
Yeah, and I think that that's part of our strategy of having purple states as well, where there's national attention. Okay, obviously we launched the Pennsylvania chase. We were tapped to do that, asked to come in and use our tactic of door knocking to knock 500,000 doors to support Trump. Well, the nice part about that, Rick, was I was able to have some autonomy on where we targeted. So Trump's on every ballot. Our Senate candidate, Dave McCormick, they're on every ballot. They don't care where we knock as long as it's the target universe that they want. But we get to decide where the Liberty champions are down ballot that are going to help us create this Liberty state. And so I tell people that that's what makes it tough. If you're doing something that is completely erroneous or random and you're in a state, let's say you're in Alabama and you are trying to get rid of the income tax, it's very difficult to get a donor in Colorado or North Dakota or Minnesota to chip in $5 to help you do that. But if you're able as an organization to have multiple battles and to have things that are going to appeal to national donors, it makes life a lot easier. I mean, I learned that in 2024. We went from having 400 to 500 donors to over 12,000 individual unique donors across the United States because of the Pennsylvania Chase program. So I don't think you want to have mission creep. I'm not saying you want to pander to donors, but if you can overlay your priorities with things that will appeal to a national audience, with things that will motivate somebody with what we call a hot fight, that is the secret sauce, I feel like, to being able to do some of the wonky things that are principled, but also tap into some of the bandwidth of national donors that are focused on hot fights at the national level and figure out how your programs can tie into that. That to me is a winning formula.
Yeah, excellent. I want to switch directions here just a little bit because you've got such great insight on organizing grassroots activists. Let's say, for example, that a state is going to ignore or just outright refuse to do anything with regard to a federal mandate, and you have a crisis type moment. How do you see that within that state, the grassroots activists can mobilize to try and ensure that they are successful in resisting, say, an unconstitutional federal mandate, whether it be vis-a-vis their state legislature, other elected officials, or just, I don't want to say posse comitatus, but just the citizens themselves. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, let me start off with the number one mistake that people make, and that is that they make it way too difficult for folks to understand it. Okay, so use the KISS rule, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And what I always encourage people, okay, at Citizens Alliance, we have a pledge process. So not to always tie it back, but let me kind of share that tactic and then play it into this. So we go to legislators and it's a simple, you will sign the pledge or you won't. And if you do sign the pledge, which is based on the state constitution, it's very much in line with the principles of what free market folks should support. And obviously we add in stuff about the lockdowns and some of the woke stuff and school choice because, those are some of the hot items at the moment. But we make it very simple. Either you sign or you don't. Not you tell us you're a conservative, not you tell us that you run and, you're a number one Trump supporter. Sign the pledge or don't. And then we hold them accountable based on their votes, not based on who they endorse, not based on process issues, not based on things that they do that personally we like them or don't. You have to stay consistent. So number one, keep it simple. Number two, stay consistent. And number three, give the elected officials a very easy black and white situation. If you leave them a gray area, they will take it. They're politicians. We teach at our candidate trainings that the safe harbor in politics is to do nothing. Okay, politicians want the ability to be Switzerland. They want to be neutral. Even folks that we like, right? The natural tendency is to do nothing because doing nothing means you're not bothering anybody. You're not pissing anybody off, right? And the people that like you are probably already going to like you. So now you're just alienating certain people. So that's the natural tendency of a politician is safe harbor of doing nothing. So if you have something that's happening in your state and you're trying to figure out, how do we really stop this or how do we figure out a way to overturn this? I'm not against doing rallies in terms of, if the grassroots has an uprising and people are, really passionate. but you have to have something to rally against or rally for. And so if you do try to organize people, maybe you put a petition together and you say, we're asking every elected official in the state legislature to call on an impeachment of this person that's currently in office, or to call on to call a special session to make sure that we get back and that, this, and this can be presented to the governor. You need to make it so that literally the politician has to either sign or put out a public statement with this exact language, and they're either on the team or they're off the team, right? As Bush said, you're either with us or you're against us. And I'm very much against George Bush, for the record. So I think that is a big thing to do. And if you do end up seeing a lot of grassroots support or rallies, make sure you're capturing information. Make sure you don't just get people in a room or get people to a rally, get them excited, and then you disperse. Get as much value as you can. Every single person that attends, get their email, get their phone number, and make sure there's an action item. But I'm telling you, a lot of the work that we do is trying to get politicians to either block something or act on something. And you have to give them a yes or no, and up and down, either you're in or you're out, and really make that simple for the activists and the grassroots to know, and then apply pressure. Have everybody in their district call them, have them knock doors, get them posting on social media. That, to me, is how you can be impactful if you're trying to do something specific in a state.
Yeah. When it comes to Gen Z, it seems to me, my sense is that they are becoming more active maybe than their predecessor generation, at least from what I'm seeing, right? It seems like they're becoming more active, but this is simultaneous with the rise in populism. And populism seems to be a very sort of centralized approach to government. So my concern is, it's fantastic if we have an engaged electorate. If this next generation is going to be engaged, it's amazing. It's fantastic. However, if they're being brought up in a sense of you either go socialist or you go populist, neither of which is a form of decentralized limited government, how can we use your expertise, for example, in mobilizing grassroots efforts to try and educate, to try and make sure that this new generation is looking at things through the proper lens?
Well, I think we have a vacuum right now. And what I mean by that is I think the left has gone so bonkers that it has created this opportunity where, of course, young people are coming and looking for something else. What else would they do? What is the alternative for a young person when you're in these public institutions, these government schools, and you are told that you have privilege? You are told that you can become a woman if you're a man. You're told that if you're a girl competing in sports, you can have a guy with a dick playing in your game. Of course, this is a natural pushback because I look at it as insanity versus rational thought. And I think, Rick, the real question is, what fills the vacuum of rational thought? Is it this, right-wing stuff that is more like, oh, well, we're going to go the Karl Rove, the Liz Cheney, and kind of this kind of wishy-washy Mitt Romney-esque vacuum that we're going to fill? I don't think Trump represents any of that, right? And I think if you have to debate, what is populism? I think if I ask 10 different people, you get 10 different answers. If I say conservative in North Dakota, that's very different than conservative in other states. And what I mean is, I think our job is to make sure that the young folks are moving in the direction of Doge. Because right now you have certain key issues on the right or nationally in politics that I think I'd like to see us really make a priority. And Doge, to me, is by far the best thing to get people to understand the proper role of government, to get people to understand free markets, to get people to understand the dangers of bureaucracy. And I don't think we've ever had this opportunity. I mean, if you would have told my libertarian heart 10 years ago that Ron Paul would be advising the richest man in the world, who's in charge of completely shrinking the federal government and rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse, I would have thought you were crazy. Like, this to me is a huge success. This is the liberty moment that we've been waiting for. But to answer your question directly, how do we make sure that these young people are turning in the right direction? I think it's just about going out and presenting rational thought through free markets, rational thought through individualism, rather than the idea that there's collectivism out there and that rugged individualism is the American trait. The Americana movement, I'm sure there's somebody out there that's called that fringe. I've never really even heard that term, but the idea of being proud of your country not your government. I think the more we can pitch that to young people, the more we can promote entrepreneurism. That type of stuff to me is what'll lead to the real American revolution that we want, of ideas in the proper role of government. But the gift to all of us right now is the left is defending all of these crazy, crazy things. They're defending men playing in girls' sports. They're defending transgender inmates getting government funded surgeries. They're defending bringing back an MS-13 gang member. And they're not just defending it. That's like their whole message. So Trump's 4D chess on a lot of the messaging stuff has been wildly successful, because the left is just so fixated. And I just think their whole message right now, they have no national message. They have no national leader. The next generation is turning completely away from them because they're tired of being told there's a war on women and all of this radical woke stuff. And so, yeah, I think it's an obvious choice, but we have to fill that vacuum with principled ideas.
Just a bit ago, you were talking about the role of legislators, or maybe even more accurately, the role of constituents in holding their legislators accountable. When it comes to being a state legislator, though, do you think that with this idea of state sovereignty or increasing state power relative to federal power, should their role be focused on the financial security of their state, of keeping spending down, taxes down, freedom maximized? Do you think that's enough, or should they also be delving into 10th Amendment issues, pushing resolutions, calling for Article 5 conventions, and so forth? Is there a role in that, or is that just noise to you?
I believe in a full blitz. If I've learned anything in politics, I've been in this game since, 2011. So it's been 14 years, which is crazy. I'm 33. But it's the one thing I've learned is you cannot piecemeal things. The only reason I have hope right now is because Doge and Trump's first couple months has been just an all-out blitz. And I think you have to do it that way. I think Elon, I was nervous that Elon would kind of tiptoe and pick certain battles. I think he's going all in. And I think if you're at the state level, it has to be that same mentality. That's why I say, look, don't just try to go in and cut government, by 2%. And then the next year, we're going to abolish the income tax. The next year, we'll tackle property tax. You have to go in with a mandate. And I think, it's tough, and it's the swamp, which is every state has a swamp at their capital, but you have to go in and just go to war. And look, when I say that, I'm not talking about violence. I'm talking about going to war against the political class, the special interests, the lobbyists, the people that just rake in all this money from hardworking blue-collar Americans. And I think you have to present your case. But I think it's going to take one state, right? The federal government is experimenting with it now, and it's the most hope I've had, right? I'm typically very pessimistic. I don't usually have any type of hope in politicians to do anything because the powers that be have a plan. And as our good friend Thomas Massey always says, the difference between House of Cards and the actual Congress is in House of Cards, there's a guy with a plan, right? When you get to Congress, it's like nobody has a plan. So I do believe in all the above. I don't believe in just doing the very mean-spirited letters, but yeah, you should put forward resolutions. You should call on the feds, to disavow certain things. You should push your state agencies to get the feds out of your state. But I think that the first thing that I always try to lead with, and because I think you have to incentivize emotion. As a politician, I don't like that. I hate that that's the game. But the left has mastered this for years, incentivizing emotion, figuring out where you can pull on heartstrings. To me, what that means at the state level, how do you improve quality of life in your state? And to me, it's a simple equation. Universal school choice, cut government by 15%, abolish income tax, abolish property tax, watch businesses flock to your state. What does that mean? Tons of jobs, and quality of life is going to improve. I think that's the recipe. I think it has to be all the above while pushing back on the feds. You can always separate it, but when you do that, everything you aim to do, it always gets depleted. So why not shoot for the moon and then see where you land?
Well, it's a nice dream. Hopefully one day it's not just a dream. I'd like to ask you a couple things, just your personal opinion. Article 5 convention, or convention of states. Do you think that's a good idea? Or when we discuss that, are you afraid of a runaway convention? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I get arguments from a lot of people on both sides of this. I think the best use of Article 5, especially on term limits, I'm a big fan of term limits, is I think the threat of term limits, what will actually happen is if enough of these states come forward with an Article 5, resolution calling on it. I know these people in Congress, right? They are not good people. There's a handful that are. I'll tell you exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to predict this. When enough states come together and this Article 5 is getting some traction, the federal Congress will come together and they will grandfather themselves in. They will pass term limits. They will grandfather themselves in so that they're all protected, that they've got, their little gravy train. They're going to make their money. They're going to be safe. And that's how it'll get passed. So I think there's a lot of good organizations. There's different opinions from a lot of people. But that, to me, is the best strategy I've heard. And I think there's a lot of groups out there pushing it. I know U.S. Term Limits is pushing it hard. They've had a lot of success in a lot of states. So I'm for using whatever tactics we can to actually shrink government. And I think the threat, you'll see Congress act very quickly to protect themselves and to protect the special interests.
Yeah. Well, good prediction. We'll I'll keep track of that. All right. So when it comes to predictions, I'd like to hear yours on one of the 4 possible outcomes with the United States, say within the next 10 years. Okay. We'll keep clicking along how we are. Nothing really changes. We keep at status quo. Or number 2, we successfully decentralize, we successfully federalize and live a little bit more harmoniously. Number 3, that doesn't happen. Something, perhaps a financial calamity, comes to pass to help create the fertile ground for a national divorce, and that occurs. Or number 4, everything goes to hell and we are in a civil war of some sort. What's your prediction?
I love that you throw me all the softballs, Rick. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I think there's only 2 paths for the country, and this could be over the next 10 years. It could be over the next 100 years. But I think it all starts with our financial stability federally. And what I mean by that is I think, there's going to be a situation where either we understand that the national debt is the greatest threat to our national security or we don't. And, I don't know. I think there's one of 2 ways. Either we figure that out and we understand that and we figure out that the value of the dollar, the fact that we are the world's currency, if we can continue that, I think there's a lot of paths to peace, to prosperity, to decentralization, to understanding proper role of government. If we don't, I think it gets, very dicey. I think where you will see a moment, here's a specific prediction, is if we get to a point where California or New York or Illinois, these states that are really struggling with solvency and bankruptcy, I think if they get to a point where enough people are leaving and the tax money that is coming into the state, the revenue, if they go to the feds and say, hey, we need you to bail us out, that is where I could see things turning pretty nasty in this country. You tell a country bumpkin in Alabama that him working, 80-hour weeks, he's going to have to pay for these liberals out in California. I don't know how that's going to go over too well. And especially when it starts to impact them putting food on the table, inflation, a lot of these costs skyrocketing, that is where I think we're going to have major problems. So I think there's one of 2 ways. Either we figure it out financially, or we don't, because I think everything comes down to that. The value of the dollar means people can put food on the table, they can pay for their house, they can protect and take care of their families. If we figure that out, there's a lot of good paths. If we don't, that's where the potential for national divorce, that's where these blue states are going to ask for bailouts. I think that's when things get ugly. But I've still got optimism, especially with Doge, that we're exposing a lot of this. But here's my thing with Doge. There's 2 steps. Step 1, expose the waste, fraud, and abuse. We're doing that right now. Step 2 is defunding it. That's going to be the real battle. The swamp doesn't like being exposed. But if they're funded, they don't care, because then they're still getting their money. Remember, Republicans screamed when Biden had 87,000 new IRS agents. But what did they do a couple months later? They gave the IRS more money than they ever have in the history of the world in their budget. So, okay, you want to scream for your speeches and your campaign promises, but then you don't have the courage to stand up to the swamp and defund it. That's what we have to see. We need that courage.
Speaking of that courage and the swamp, we've got Doge working, identifying all sorts of waste, but then we also simultaneously recently, in the last couple of months, had a continuing resolution which continues funding everything that Doge recognized, discovered as waste. Percentage chance of having a decrease to the budget this coming for the remainder of this session?
I think it's in Trump and Elon's court. I think Trump and Elon have built up enough credit. And I understand the difference between Thomas Massey and Scott Perry's opinion on the last CR, right? Massey has said, listen, I've been promised things for the last 15 years. I'm done being promised. Perry said, listen, I've been promised a lot of things for years too, and I don't usually have any interest in going along, but here's the difference. There's a guy named Elon Musk who's been tasked with actually exposing this stuff, and we're promised that in the next budget is when we're going to take action. So if Elon and Trump are 100% aligned and they present a budget and they tell all the Republicans to get in line and Republicans have the majorities in both, that's where I have the idea that there could be a chance that we actually cut government. If they don't, if it's more, hey, let's see what Johnson comes up with, let's see what Thune comes up with, the swamp's able to kind of lobby enough Republicans, I think we're just going to have the same thing we've always had. So I think it's Elon and Trump that have to come forward. They have to be bold. They have to lead on it. They have to present a budget. And if they do that, I mean, listen, I have a lot of faith in politicians falling in line. That's the one thing I do have faith in. They care about three things. Okay, we teach this at our trainings: getting elected, getting reelected, getting elected to higher office. And so if they see that Trump and Elon are presenting this and there's enough noise that they have to support this, right? The sellout scumbags like Don Bacon in Nebraska, he'll fall in line. You mark my words. He might say, oh, Cliff Maloney's a monster and he's a radical. And no, I'm going to stand for the people and I'm a moderate. No, you won't, Don. You will fall in line because your Republican voters are that aware, because Elon has such a microphone. Trump has the attention of the entire Republican electorate, that these Republicans are going to have to vote for it. So that is my wish, is that Trump and Elon come forward with something bold. Don't give any room for negotiation with Thune and Johnson, and every Republican will fall in line. That's the only path to us actually cutting government.
You know, this attention on Doge, which is fantastic. I mean, the average voter, I think, now has some awareness of this concept of Doge, or this concept of government efficiency and the need for it. I have a concern that they're so close, as you've just pointed out, the possibility, it's just right there. It's ripe for picking. If the Republican majority Congress fails in doing something, I'm just wondering what the ramifications are, because I don't think we've ever had reason to have this much hope as we do now. If they fail now, there is no hope. And so I guess I think there's a lot of pressure in my mind, that there's so much that is to be gained or lost on what they do over the next year.
And I think a lot of this is going to come down to messaging. Okay, the swamp is going to give the Republicans an out to say, listen, just do something that's more a press release, right? Keep the funding going, but put something out. We'll give you talking points, and you can say, you know, that you were able to help people, and, you know, anything that happens with inflation or the cost of goods and services that drops, they'll just try to highlight that. That's what they're going to try to do. What I'd like to see, like you said, is them take advantage of this once in a lifetime opportunity with Doge to pass a budget, give it 3 to 4 months to see how that benefits. I think costs will come down. Inflation will, be much more stagnant. And then you're heading into a midterm. I'm nervous about 2026, right? We've got a lot of key battles. One of the big ones we're doing is trying to take out Governor Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. He's very well liked. He won by double digits in a 50-50 state when he ran 4 years ago. It's going to be tough. And so I am hoping for something bold that we can run on. But typically Republicans, even when they have control, the swamp gets a hold of them and the establishment doesn't allow that. And then you don't have much to run on. The one out we have is that the Democrats are so bad with their message right now. They're so bad with a leader that maybe we can, kind of just work our way through in 2026 and hold that majority. But I think you're right. Why are Republicans going to be motivated if all these promises were made to drain the swamp and then we're not cutting any of it? And so I think that could be a huge backlash that we have to worry about when we're trying to predict what happens in 26.
Gotcha. I have one final question for you, sir. So there's a national divorce. You're originally from Pennsylvania. You've lived in many places since. So you've got the western seaboard as one state. You've got the central swath flyover states as a second. You've got the northeast Yankeedom as the third, and you've got the Southeast as a fourth. What state do you choose to live in?
I think it depends on how bad the divorce is. If we're apocalyptic and it's pretty bad out there, and we're trying to figure out where we need to be for hunting and gathering, and surviving between our neighbors, it's very different than if it's like, hey, the United States is kind of split up, but states still have their sovereignty and their economies in each of the states. So that will dictate it. North Idaho is a great place. Right now, I have Idaho as the most likely for a state to be that example that I'm talking about, a liberty state. We've got like 40% in each of the chambers that are hardcore aligned, free market, strong conservatives that believe in the Constitution. They believe in decentralization. They believe in creating opportunities and pushing back against the feds. North Dakota is right there as a huge opportunity. New Hampshire, right there as well. Those are our top three states. Florida, spent some time in Florida, so I'd also put Florida on the map. But Florida's very populated, so depending on how bad it gets and what security looks like, it's a little different. But I think, look, there's a lot of states that are beautiful, that haven't figured out, that have resources. I'm hoping that we come to peaceful terms on things and that we figure things out in our country. But probably between North Idaho, North Dakota, and Florida are the three places, if things got really bad, that I would want to be.
Gotcha. Should Idaho take the eastern half of Oregon?
I'm not going to oppose it. It's funny, but I also think Idaho right now is heading on such a good trajectory that expanding and having, in my shoes, I've got to be able to go out and get patriots to support other patriots running for office. I've got to go up against the swamp when it comes to money out in Boise. So expanding it makes it a little more difficult. Maybe some more money comes in. Idaho is a really, really great state. It's on track to do some phenomenal things. They've been really good recently on a lot of the lockdown stuff, pushing back on woke, cutting a lot of these regulations. There's a lot of work to do, right? I'm not saying we're there, but yeah, I'd probably like to just get it to where we've created the example before we start expanding out.
Yeah, that sounds pretty reasonable. Well, Cliff, thank you very much. I appreciate your insights. A lot of wisdom in there. We'll welcome you to North Dakota when the divorce happens. But thank you again. Take care.
Appreciate you, Rick. Thanks so much.